What are the metrics that you track most religiously at Pantheon?
Yeah, well, thanks, Sid. Glad to be here. So the religious one is net dollar retention. And the reason is effectively net dollar retention is the foundational metric in SaaS. And the expansion and low churn, being able to upsell, is why SaaS economics work. This is why SaaS companies are valued as they are. This is why multiples are on revenue. This is why we have been so fortunate to be enjoying, at least over the last few years, excluding last couple of quarters, fairly solid growth and investment into SaaS companies, because you get a customer and the expectation is that the customer stays and actually expands the usage. That is what net dollar retention NDR measures. Now you can have constituents, you can have derivatives, you can have flavors, gross dollar retention, and so on. But effectively, that's the religious metric at Pantheon.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you like balance that with gross customer retention? Because I've come across businesses where like the net dollar retention is amazing, but the gross customer retention is like a little more middling, and it's always unclear how much to be concerned in that situation.
Ours is exceedingly healthy, so I don't track it as religiously because it's so good. A point here or there for us, thankfully, doesn't matter. We are a very, very sticky product. We are trying to create levers for upsell and increased adoption and adoption of different tools and adoption by more people. That shows a net dollar retention. But gross dollar retention is very healthy. So I look at it, but not religiously.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of the traditional sort of like sales efficiency metrics, whether they be payback period or LTV CAC or whatever, they often sort of ignore the growth part of the net dollar retention, like the over 100%. I'm wondering how you think about a very healthy net dollar retention, how that translates into what your willingness to spend on sales and marketing is.
Yeah, well, that's different. As you said, those are different metrics. The goals for sales and marketing efficiency could be different depending on your net dollar retention, frankly, also depending on your gross margin. But the economics of SaaS are definitely driven in large part by net dollar retention. The higher your net dollar retention and gross margin, consequently, you can afford to spend a little bit more on sales and marketing. But there's a way we measure sales and marketing, which is not dissimilar to how other SaaS companies measure it. We just have the luxury of, goaling hours to what we goal because of net dollar retention and gross margin.
Got it. That makes sense. Do you, how much effort do you invest in slicing and dicing up some of the sales and marketing sort of spend? Like how deep do you go?
It's never enough. It's never enough. And frankly, it changes from not necessarily quarter to quarter, but it changes depending on where we see the issues with the business. What is it exactly that we're trying to improve? Are we trying to improve top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel? Are we going through a pricing review? And so on. So are we working on introducing specific product? Have we just introduced a new product so that we need to track that? Are we working on understanding what's happening with a certain customer cohort? So we would slice and dice it by that. But you can slice and dice it in effectively infinite number of ways. So the art of finance is to figure out which slice is important for the problem you're trying to solve now. And will the slice, this is critical, will the slice be actionable by the business? Because if I slice it by, which day of the week a deal was signed, well, what am I expecting sales reps to do? Don't sign it on a Wednesday and sign everything on a Thursday if that shows higher net dollar retention? No. So it has to be, I have to be very thoughtful on and slice and dice it by something that can actually be acted on.
That's such good advice, and I really love that definition of like the art and finance. And I'm curious. Maybe this is hard to do without a specific case, but you tell me. But I'm wondering if there's like genericized advice on how you can determine what are the slices that might matter most for your business, or
Well,
like,
you look at your operations and you look at where the levers are in your go-to-market process. Is the lever in top of the funnel and how you have some flexibility into how you go to market? You have maybe explored events, but not demand gen online, or maybe you've explored partner program, but not something else. And you're in the process of exploring that, then this is how you slice and dice it. But you start with your go-to-market motion, and that's and your customer as well. Which customer are you pursuing? And the combination of that gives you some notion of what could be impacted. What are you working on to impact? Some things could be incredibly important, but if you can't make an impact, fairly in the near term, then it's useless. Of course, there could be things that you decide to act on in the long term, maybe through product innovation. So you just have to be very thoughtful about what kind of an impact your slicing and dicing could lead to.
yeah, great point. What is your sort of like why you care about metrics and data? What is the thing that it drives for you, and why do you think it's important?
Yeah, it's what can the organization act on and achieve the highest possible strategic return in the shortest possible time with with the smallest possible investment. And that could be something in product, that could be something in org design, this could be something in pricing, in cost of goods sold, and so on. So it's important to understand which actions move those metrics so that the organization can impact them, or at least diagnose that this is a problem and then have a thoughtful conversation about how to correct that.
And what are like the some of the challenges that you've seen in actually calculating SaaS metrics?
What I've seen, and different CFOs may have different experience. For us, a challenge is aligning on customer hierarchy. What is defined a customer? Is it a company at an aggregate level? Is it a department? Is it a team? Is it a subscription? Is it a partner? It's not trivial, but the difference in how you think about it could lead to vastly different definitions and vastly different process of measuring things. Different definitions across the company could also lead to massive misunderstandings and misdiagnosing the problem. So aligning on customer as well as incredible operational pain. So that is a big one. And then going down the list, late renewals are a big one for SaaS. Sometimes the company keeps negotiating with an important customer after the renewal deadline, and it happens to us when we're a client, and it happens to us when we are the vendor. But thinking about how to account for those days and lack of subscription on a certain date is a challenge. Another one I came across, again, going down the list, sometimes there's inconsistency in how finance thinks about those metrics and how sales thinks about those metrics, specifically for purposes of calculating variable comp for reps. But you're going down the list. There are plenty of issues. If the last one, you have one result for the company, another result if you add up all the variable compensation across sales team, you may get different payout. So that just creates a little bit of a churn. But as long as you can reconcile the two, and as long as you don't incentivize wrong type of behavior, you're fine. You can work through that.
Yeah, that all makes a ton of sense. How do you have sort of like a framework for thinking through some of the customer hierarchy stuff? Because it can result in vastly different numbers. depending on how you look at the hierarchy,
I
right?
wish I could give a better answer. We have a number of frameworks, and that's possibly the problem. But one framework is product-based. It's an account. In our case, we call it organizational dashboard. It could be based on the commercial relationship. There are multiple subscriptions, but built to the same address, the same email, if you will. It could be legal relationship. Multiple agreements are subject to the same legal framework. There could be third-party validations. There are different companies that commercially compile sort of trees of company hierarchies. So all of that is possible, but what you have competing priorities, and you need to reconcile those. One competing priorities is finance. Has its own set of stakeholders, internal and external. Sales has operational considerations. Marketing has to be consistent with sales to be in line, but it has its own set of notions and motions for how they reach out to prospective prospects with account-based marketing and certain other marketing methodologies. So that those are the issues, but there are plenty of methodologies. That's it's figuring out which one to use and how to reconcile trade-offs.
Yeah, I guess that's the art of finance.
That's the art of finance, exactly.
Love it.
Well, that's also the art of diplomacy. You have to make sure to align the whole company around a certain set of definitions, or you have to agree as a company that you're going to have different definitions for different use cases, and then agree to reconcile when needed as necessary.
It's like a form of organizational debt that you take on.
Or just an additional organizational capability and investment that you need to develop, for sure.
Yeah, fair enough. We're recording this in late September 2022, and it's been a pretty challenging sort of 2022 for many SaaS companies. And how do you think about sort of the broader economic environment, and how does that impact decisions that you have to make as a CFO?
I try to focus on things that I can control. Now, having said that, we are fortunate to have been funded about 13, 14 months ago last summer and received significant infusion of capital. We raised $100 million in July of 2021. So we were well funded. We were funded until profitability. Of course, the challenge and the opportunity is to create a forcing function, create a mechanism so that we can achieve more from the same resources going forward. This is not about, every company again is different. This is not about trying to achieve the same from fewer resources. This is about achieving more from the same resources. So of course we are fortunate in that extent, but we are not operating in a vacuum, even though I can't necessarily control the global macro picture. But it is what it is, and you have to be mindful of that. I'm sure a lot of other CFOs and companies are dealing with the same thing. And it's a healthy exercise. It is a very healthy exercise. How do we structure our work processes, our systems, our go-to-market, our product and engineering efforts, such that we accomplish more from the investments we have made in 2022 and in 2021. It's not easy. But it's definitely doable. We all, as a company, everybody knows that we can grow our customer base, we can grow our revenues, we can produce innovation, we can satisfy more use cases from more customers and do it better with the same level of investment. It's just literally how do you organize your work.
Yeah. When times are volatile like this, planning becomes significantly harder. And I'm curious how you think about that, because the range of sort of projections of what 2023 will look like are now like wider, like the spread is quite wide, and that makes trying to make decisions about the future super hard. Curious how you handle that level of uncertainty.
In some cases it's harder, in some cases it's easier. You have more constraints. When you have more constraints, you don't have to make as many decisions. On the top line, yes, there is a greater, as you said, spread of possible outcomes. So the answer to that, and what I'm actively trying to instill in my own organization and at the company at large, is not trying to predict perfectly. It's trying to build a system and a process that we can adjust the forecast and act on the adjustment as the year goes through. So I know I'll have a plan for 2023 prepared for the board meeting when I need to prepare it for, and I know it's going to be wrong. The objective is not to be right. The objective is to be reasonable and build processes in place and align on expectations with the broader company that we will reevaluate throughout the year. And if the plan has you get X additional headcount, or the plan has us engaging in this particular initiative in July, we will reconsider this come April or whatever time it may be. So that's coming back to the art of finance. That's the art. The art is not to be precise. The act is to guide actions in near real time in a way that's consistent with corporate objectives.
Yeah, I think this has sort of come up a couple of times in this conversation, where the art of like negotiating and working with the others, because finance is like inherently a role that has to sort of span across the organization. And I'm curious, like, sort of how do you think about your role vis-a-vis the other leaders at Pantheon? Like, how do you conceptualize what your job is relative to the functional leaders of the various divisions?
Yeah, it's to a large degree aligning everyone on same set of priorities and objectives, making sure that as a company we're efficient, not each department, but as a company we are efficient, and really helping people see how shareholder value is created based on actions of each team, if not each individual within their department. But again, most of it is aligning and demonstrating the sort of flow through of actions into a financial result.
That's great. In an ideal world, what's a level deeper that you wish more finance teams would go into SaaS metrics?
Yeah. Each company would be different, and each finance team would be different, specifically because each business model is different, and each issue at any given point in time is different. So even within the same company, that should change based on objectives at a particular time. I'm going to throw Anna Karenina at you and Tolstoy. Each family is each happy family is alike. Each family is unhappy in its own way or something similar, but each companies are the same. All successful companies have much more in common than companies that have a lot of room for improvement. And so it's on finance to create the right drivers and understanding of those drivers and how those drivers translate into financial results, and to track those. But broadly speaking, all of this falls into two buckets. One is operational data and tracing from actions of each team or individuals. And the second bucket is customer data, customer lifecycle data. So what are customers, how customers are engaging in your product experience? What are they using? What are they not using? What are they using more of, less of, and so on and so forth. For a lot of SaaS companies that have product-led growth elements and allow customers to experience the product upfront, what are those trends? How does that translate into future buying behavior, and how do you create forecast? And tying those two to the financial model is the holy grail. Again, what specifically is being tied into the financial model would be different for every company and would be different for each company at different points in time. But the holy grail, again, is combining those three. And that could be really changing for how management is conducted. This is a different way of running the company that with the modern data and tech stack, finance departments, finance leaders can help companies.
That's great. As at the stage that Pantheon is, a lot of folks, and I'm sure this is true for you, are looking ahead to potentially IPOing at some point in the future. And I'm curious, like, as you think about sort of that path of a company, how do the things that, like, especially from a metrics perspective, the things that you think a lot about or spend most of your time obsessing over, how does that change over time? And how do you think it will change as you get closer to that milestone?
They haven't changed for me. Net dollar retention is still the main one, and close to 100% of SaaS companies refer to it in their public filings. So that I think you started the conversation with which metrics I pay religious attention to. It's definitely the same. Other ones are easier: billings, bookings, things like that. It's not like you need to provide a dozen non-GAAP metrics when you go out, because once you go out with them, you're kind of you gotta have to stick to them for several years. But it's unquestionable that net dollar retention would be one of those. So yeah, I think when you go public, like the focus changes and the level of expected consistency changes, and the notion that you can't go back or you can't like change them at will. That's there, but the focus is still on the most important ones.
That's a good point. So you almost have to be even more focused as to what is going to matter in the long run, because you can't be reporting one quarter on a different set, a different quarter. Yeah, totally. Some of these metrics, especially like the retention metrics, are kind of interesting because they're reported as one number, but really it's not just one number. It's like a whole set of numbers. You can only communicate so much generally, but especially to a broad audience. I'm curious, like how you think about sort of, retention metrics on a cohort basis versus like one number, and like how to interpret and think about it, and how to operationalize it.
My job is to present Pantheon in the most favorable light. That's clearly articulated what I'm presenting and true to form. But at the end of the day, I am there to sell the company to shareholders and prospective shareholders. So I do pay attention to that, and think about IR part of my job. But of course, I need to be clear, transparent, timely, accurate, and present the company in the most true light, but also in a favorable one.
Yeah. When it comes to presenting the company versus like operationally making decisions, how do you think about sort of like, you kind of need almost more detail, right?
Yes,
On an
yeah,
operational
of
level?
course we need more details. Yeah, of course we need more details. So I track sub-components, for example, of net dollar retention. There's upsell. Upsell sometimes happens at renewal. Sometimes upsell happens mid-stage. Why does it happen? Do, in our case, customers add more sites, or do they add more tools, or do they use more support? And all the pricing levers that we have. That's important for me to understand, but it would be way too much information, and frankly, that information would be very hard to decipher for an outsider, and it has no impact. What matters is the total result presented consistently from period to period, and forecasts of those numbers. Like those are important, but operationally, of course, you need to go level deeper, and the level depends on the corporate objectives. What are you trying to improve? If we're trying to introduce more products that we want to sell, then maybe mid-cycle upsell is important, because we want to call the customers and tell them, hey, we just released Autopilot, our newest feature. You want to try. If you go through a pricing exercise, you really want to keep track on, okay, what is happening when people at renewal are asked to switch to a new pricing schema. So that really depends. And operationally, it will change from, it's not going to change every quarter, but it will change as objectives change.
Makes sense. I sort of have one last question for you, which is our core audience are Series B and C company finance leaders, and having seen everything that you've seen over your career, what's a piece of advice that you would offer that group?
Yeah. What I haven't done really well, and I would do differently if I could do it again, is to incorporate more of operational metrics and product and customer lifecycle metrics into the core of my model. And then at least get into the develop the muscle of incorporating that. And again, what exactly is incorporated could change, but it would force discipline on other departments. It would even force different way of thinking about product development. You want to make sure that in your product organization, data is first class citizen, that they think about data as they think about the product, not as an after effect. Let's develop the product and then see how we can extract data out of it. That doesn't work. But if the organization doesn't understand how the finance will use that, or other teams will use that directly or through finance, then it's harder to argue that data has to be first class citizen. And it's true for tracking operational activities as well. So I think that would be a much more improved finance decision making, but also just a much more improved way of operating the company. And as a leadership team, looking at the company, not at the board level necessarily, but definitely at the level of executive team decision making.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. Amazing. Thank you so much for all the time and all the insights. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Sid. Thank you for great questions. Enjoyed being here.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Before you go, let me give you a super quick overview of what Subscript is, because chances are we can help you. I started Subscript because in my last business, I had this problem. We had this giant Google spreadsheet, and that's where we kept track of everything about our business. And if you're anything like me, you're a data-driven leader who really cares to understand numbers in order to make sure that you're making the right decisions. But when you're looking at a giant spreadsheet with lots of just tabs on tabs on tabs and lots of people with access, you're probably not looking at the right thing, because you can never be confident that someone didn't mess something up, or that someone didn't fat finger a number, or that you considered all the corner cases that you actually needed to consider. So that's what Subscript does. We help you understand your subscription business at a much deeper level than you ever thought possible. If you'd be interested in giving it a try, come check us out at subscript.com.